Welcome, everybody, and thanks for being here. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Maria. Maria Giudice.
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 Judice.
Judice.
Okay.
I try.
It's very good. It's very good to have the introducer not know how to pronounce my last name.
I remember other people having trouble with this.
Oh,
I tried
everybody
to practice.
does. Even if you did practice, you would get it wrong. So don't worry.
So, you probably have heard about Maria as the VP of Experience Design at Autodesk. She had her own design agency called Hot Studio, and then she sold it to Facebook and was the director of product design at Facebook for some time. But more than that, I knew her as a woman who gave me 20 minutes of awesome advice on the BART ride home.
That's right. That's right.
She is basically she's like the cool aunt that your mother warns you about, but she gives you all the right advice, all the right things to say, and she has awesome insights about how to elevate design from just a craft to something that really changes everything that you do and the way you look at organizations, culture, and even people. So that's what I thought she would be an amazing person to speak to us, and that's why she's here.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Happy to be here. So it's just great to be in Berkeley. I actually live in Oakland, so it's not very far of a ride for me. So it's pretty awesome to come here. What I thought I'd do, we have about an hour. We've about an hour and a half, and it's a class. And I'm a teacher at CCA. I teach entrepreneurship at CCA. So I thought what I'd do is I'll give you, for some of you who don't really know who I am, other than apparently I'm going to add this to my resume, the cool aunt that has good wisdom. I like that. I thought I'd give you like just a little breakdown of my career, my story, why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then what I'd love is to turn it on back and have you just ask questions. I really want to understand why you are all here. Like, all of you are here because you have one or two questions on your mind. I'd like to be able to answer them before you leave. I also have authored a book called Rise of the DEO, and I think that's one of the reasons that I was invited to come, because somebody from the School of Information saw my talk and said, can you give that talk here? And I'd rather not give you that talk because it's online. So you could all listen to that talk. But I'm happy to answer questions about design leadership as well. Does this make sense as a good framework? Awesome. Okay, so let me tell you my story, and I'll go way back. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian parents. And when I was 2 years old, we moved over to Staten Island when the Verrazano Bridge was built. And ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be an artist. That was my destiny in life. I had an uncle named Frank Frazetta. I don't know if anybody knows Frank Frazetta here. Anybody? Big comic book fan? He's a pretty well-known artist in the fantasy art world. And I just couldn't believe that he actually made a living painting every day. So I was just really enamored with that idea, and I was like, well, if he can do it, I could do it. So I grew up studying painting and drawing, and it was just something that just came natural to me. I was always drawing. And as I progressed through school, I was always the class artist. There's always one of you who gets pinged that. Either you have the best penmanship, or you can do really good displays. And so I was always that person, that class artist. But I always thought of myself as a fine artist, not a graphic designer. And I went through, kindergarten, I went through public school, I went through high school, but my whole sort of youth, I always seemed to be able to make a living, make money doing the work that I loved. So my mother owned a cooking school and she taught in the basement of my house. And I would have my paintings hung up on the wall when I was like 15 years old. And one day her students were, hey, your daughter's pretty talented. Remember, 15, not that good. And can your daughter take commissions? And of course, Mom was like, yeah, of course she could do. And she said, can you paint a portrait? And then my mother was a little worried because I was 15. She said, I don't know about that. She says, well, can you do portraits of my dogs? And so then I started doing these dog portrait paintings. I did one dog portrait painting, and then suddenly I did several dog portrait paintings. And so I started I would say my first real freelance gig was a dog portrait painter. And then when I went to high school, I painted jean jackets. This was the 70s, when it was really cool to own a jean jacket with a band, an album cover on the back. I don't know, any of you ever seen that? You got one? Do you have one? I'm waiting for it to come back. I want to start my career again doing those paintings. There you go. Yeah, there's a perfect shape for painting. And so I started doing these jean jackets. I would get like $100 a piece for a jean jacket. But I would do the jean jacket painting while I was babysitting. So I essentially doubled my hourly rate. So my whole life, I had this knack for making a living and following my passion, which was art. I didn't think I was going to be a graphic designer at all, but I really loved lettering. So when I went to Cooper Union, how many of you are familiar with Cooper Union, New York? It's an art, architecture, and engineering school. And this was in the early 80s when I went to Cooper Union. And I still went in I came in as a painter, but I started taking all of these classes. And I took a class in computer programming. I actually took a Fortran coding class. I don't know why. And I took some architecture courses so I could improve my drawing skills. And I had no idea that art, architecture, and engineering would all be related. I don't think anybody did when they went to Cooper Union at that time. It's so ironic. That school was founded in the 1800s, and now art, architecture, and engineering is what I do for a living. So I just started taking graphic design classes, and I was just like, what's the big deal? You can, here's a list of fonts. Here's a grid, put stuff on the grid, flush everything left, put some white space, pick a really great image, design, done. And that was my vision of what I thought graphic design was. I was like, there's really no meaning in this work, but I can make a living doing that. That would be my fallback career if I couldn't make a living as a painter. And it was my senior year of college, and it was a design class. And there was a teacher that came in, a guest instructor, much like what I'm doing right here. And he walks in. His name is Richard Saul Werman. He's actually a trained architect, but turned designer, which a lot of architects do. They move from a 3D world to a 2D world. And he waddles in. And I was like, just overweight. He had a big scarf. Very different, did not look like the designers of the 80s, which were very tall, white boys that all looked exactly the same. And I certainly did not look like a designer, a typical designer. I had the high hair, like Wendy from Prince on the Revolution. Do you know that hair with the big thing that goes like this? That was my hair. So he walks in, he looks at all of us, much like what I'm doing right now with you guys, and he goes, "You are all full of shit." And I was like, I love this man. And I was like, okay. He goes, "You all think you're designers. Well, what you're doing, this is, the kind of work that you're learning is meaningless. Design is not about, decoration. Design is about helping people make sense of the world." 1984. I was like, holy shit. That was that moment. That was that turning point for me when I suddenly realized what my calling was. It all made sense. And I tell this lesson over and over again, because as you guys are going through your careers, it could be today, it could have been yesterday, it could be maybe tomorrow. There's going to be people that are going to come into your life where they're going to say something or do something that's going to change your trajectory. So keep an eye out for that. Look out for that moment. So suddenly that moment all started making sense to me, that my job as a designer is to be in service to others. It just hit. And that was 1984. That was pre-internet. That was pre-Macintosh. It was an analog world. And then the whole rest of my career has been devoted to creating design in service to others. If I'm not doing something that is not making somebody happy, that's not educating them, that's not inspiring them, that's not changing their mindset, then I am not doing my job as a designer in this world. So I have consistently been doing that my whole career. So I worked for him right out of school. This was in New York, in the East Village. And back then, he had these things called access guides. Now remember, pre-computer, pre-internet. And they were these guidebooks that were designed the way people experience cities. They were not designed like traditional guidebooks that you see today, which are, category of hotels and a category of like things to do and a category of attractions and a category of nightlife. This was, here's a map of a city. I'm going to cut the city up, and I'm going to contextualize all the things you can do within a certain location. Sounds kind of obvious now, but it was a revolutionary way of exploring a city. And I think that's the part of my job, that's the part of my job as a designer, is to really be thinking about things that are much more, mapping much more closely to humans and human behavior. Not letting design get in the way of thinking about what's going to be intuitive for somebody. So I worked on guidebooks. He said, you're Italian. You could work on Rome access. And I'm like, come on in. I was like, well, can I go to Rome to do research? He goes, no, but here, this is the book you're doing. So my first guidebook was called Rome Access. And while I was working for him in New York and loving being in the Village, he got the gig to redesign the Pacific Bell Yellow Pages. I know I'm completely dating myself, but do you guys know what the Yellow Pages are? Right. No, I don't think they know Pacific Bell, but how many people have at least grown up with the Yellow Pages? Have you ever opened a Yellow Page, or is it, you have? Yeah, I mean, in today's age, I remember getting a phone book and then tossing it and recycling immediately. But back then, that was the system. That was the system that connected communities together. That was the only way you can connect people. And it was this system that was basically an A to Z system to find people. And then there were categories where you can find services. That's what the Yellow Pages were. But it was a very linear system. You have to know somebody's name in order to reach them. And then you had to know the category to which things were filed under in the Yellow Pages. So for example, if you wanted to look for a car, you would have to know that was under automotive. It wasn't under car. Anyway, it was an opportunity. It's like, we want to reimagine what the Yellow Pages can be. And I was not going to leave New York at all. I was a total East Bay New Yorker. New York is the center of the universe. No way. But being in my 20s, much like you, I had a friend who was going to move to San Francisco. And I went, well, she's going to San Francisco. I'm still going to stay in New York. Why don't I volunteer to help set up the office and hang out in San Francisco for a couple of months, which is the only reason why I came out here, was to get a free trip to San Francisco. And so I came out to work on that project. And it was a great project. It was reimagining how people navigate their community. And when I got here, I fell very concretely into information design systems. And I started designing maps. And so I soon became the map queen for the Pacific Bell Yellow Pages. And now this is Yellow Pages that are all through California and Nevada. And so I had to learn how to design maps. And maps, if any of you ever have a chance to design a map, it's a pure information design problem. Pure. Because everything that you do on a map conveys information. There's nothing gratuitous about maps. So typography shows scale. A solid line, the weight of a line can depict whether it's a freeway or a dirt road. The color that you use can connote county boundaries. It was like pure design problem. And so I started working on that. And I worked on that for a couple of years. And while I was working on that, boom, the Mac landed on my desk. And it was the Mac, maybe Mac Plus, maybe the Mac 2 CI, and it had Times New Roman and Helvetica and some system fonts. And it had programs like Illustrator 1.0, maybe a beta, had Photoshop, a beta. And nobody knew how to use this stuff.
So I can tell you it wasn't Mac Plus.
What was it?
It had to be a color Mac if Photoshop existed.
Was it Mac? It wasn't CI. It was before that. Mac 2. Mac 2. Thank you. Mac 2. Thank you. And so I started learning. We all had to we were pioneers. We had to learn how to use this new system. And I kind of suddenly going back to college and realizing that I took a class in computer programming, I really got into this sort of juxtaposition between design and technology and how technology can enable design. And I got geeked out on it. So I soon became an expert in how to use the computer as a design tool. And so when I finally left it was called the Understanding business, I went to the same girlfriend who I came out with just to hang out, she suddenly was teaching in Japan, teaching English in Japan. And she actually hand wrote me a letter, because that's what you did in those days. And she said, hey, I'm finished teaching in Japan. I'm going to go travel through Europe. And I was ready to quit my job. So I went and hung out in Europe for 3 months. And when I came back, I didn't have any money. I didn't have a place to live, and I didn't have no money, no place to live, and no job. So what do? You start freelancing. So I started freelancing. This was 1990. And then now it's going to speed up. And then I just kept getting busier. So I kept getting busier, and then I'm like, well, I'm busy. I'm going to hire some friends. And then I kept hiring friends, and I accidentally founded a company. That's how it works. So going back to the story when I was a kid doing the paintings, I suddenly knew how to make a living doing what I loved. So I was able to continually hire people and make a profit and build a business. So so then I grew a company. And I had a couple of companies before Hot Studio with a bunch of people, and that didn't work. In the 1993, 1994, people were saying, hey, you think about design a really specific way. Can you design a website? I'm like, I don't know what a website is, but I'm sure I can do it. This was the Mosaic Netscape 1.0 days. Again, it was like, boom. Lands on, there's this thing called HTML, and you try it out, and it's magic. It's magic before it crashes. And so I became really good at web design. And so that was my offering. So being good at technology, being good at design, being good at managing people, being good at making money, I became a really good business person. So I founded a company called Hot Studio in 1997, and I grew it from a small group of people to over 100 people in both New York and San Francisco. And we did interaction design, and it was multidisciplinary. We had design strategists, we had content strategists, we had visual designers, we had user experience designers, we had developers. And so we were doing end-to-end design. And Facebook was a company that at the time, it was 2011, 2012, when they started realizing that their products worked really well. They were technically interesting, but they weren't experientially good. And Mark Zuckerberg, like many, many companies are doing right now, have realized that it's not about technology anymore. It's not that technology is the thing that makes companies great. It's actually design. It's actually experience design. Because in the world that I grew up in a world where we were just grateful that the technology worked. Don't you remember those days? I remember firing up a computer, seeing a web page for like a second, getting really happy, and then it crashing. Or watching it load very slowly. I remember the days of Photoshop when I rotated something and it took half an hour to rotate. And you were happy at the end of it, not sad. I remember firing up the desktop printer before I went to bed at night, and waking up and it's just finished printing. That's the world I grew up in. The world you grew up in is you grew up in a world where you grew up with technology. You expect technology to work. You expect experiences to be great. So that movement, that change, puts a lot of pressure on people to think about good experience design. And this is where we are today, where design is what differentiates a product. Design is what moves a product from being good to being great. And designers are now making the same amount of money that our engineering friends are making. So it's a great time to learn about design. It's a great time to be a designer. So I'm going to stop right there. And I'm going to now ask you, based on the story that I told you, and I want to find out why you are here. Why did you come here to listen to me? I'm going to pick on people because that's what I do because I'm a teacher. Why are you here?
Before you get started, we do have a microphone. This, again, is not for amplification in the room, as you all can notice that. This is for our online community.
This is for tall people. Okay,
Yes.
I'll go here.
So if you can, when the question is asked, if you hand me back the mic and I can shuttle it to the next person, that way it can be pretty seamless.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
All right, I'm gonna listen for a minute, and we're gonna pass around. I just want to know your questions. Go speak in the mic.
So I think nowadays, like, design thinking is very important for organization.
Uh-huh.
So I know that not only like technology firms they use design thinking, but also many consumer products such as like Pepsi and Coca-Cola, they incorporate design thinking into their product design. So I just want to learn more about the design thinking and the application.
All right, I'm not going to answer that right now. I'm just going to freestyle themes. Design thinking in companies. Okay, what else? Let me hear from somebody else.
I'm curious about the role that research plays in your design process and in design thinking, and the interplay between the two, if there is one, in your opinion.
Okay.
I'm curious about your philosophy on how to account, like making design inclusive and addressing diversity of your user base.
Inclusiveness in design process. Okay, next.
With the democratization of hardware and manufacturing, I'm seeing this trend where a lot of my engineering friends understand that they need to lead with design. There's this whole thing with this kind of scandalous thing with the Indiegogo and Kickstarter campaigns, which will never deliver the products to their customers because they didn't think about how to design for manufacturing.
Designing for manufacturing?
So I guess that's a good way of summarizing.
So you want to know how to design or some of the things to look out for when you're designing for manufacturing?
I'm trained as an engineer, so I like to think about, I always think of myself as having terrible aesthetic.
Okay.
But is there, thinking about sort of processes to help about that going forward.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, I talked to a friend recently about his startup, and he told me about how he tackles ambiguity as a designer and how design creates flexibility for companies. So I'm interested in what kind of design philosophy earns design an executive position in a company.
So I heard some of that. So you're saying design philosophy about?
Just how it can create flexibility for companies.
Okay, so inside a company.
Yeah, and what kind of
The impact of
philosophy
design
or,
inside a company and its philosophy?
or how it could. I mean, there's some companies that have maybe they have chief design officers or that sort of thing. Others don't. So what kind of design or design philosophy earns that?
Okay. Okay. Who else? Yeah.
So the question I had is actually asked by someone else. So I'm going to ask you something else.
Okay.
So your bio says protagonist, and I
Protagonist, yep.
haven't usually seen that anywhere else. So I'm a bit curious about that.
You're curious why I put protagonist?
Yeah. Or what it means to you.
What it means protagonist. Okay. Yep. I think I would put that over here. Okay.
Hi. So at Autodesk, you design for both engineers and for artists
Yes.
and animators. And I'm curious about how those relate to each other and how that, like, how you form your brand around that and how those, like, feed into each other.
Great. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I admire how you've remained true to yourself through the whole story of your life. And I was wondering how you continued to be the author of your own story through all of these changing things. And in some way, how you designed your life, a design perspective from that vantage point.
All right. What else? Yeah.
Specifically inside the design thinking for companies section, I wanted to know more about your thoughts on culture design or process design or
Inside
organizational
companies?
design. Yep.
Okay.
And maybe if you could speak about how you have intentionally designed certain or tackled some problem. Maybe if you could give an example from your life.
Inside a company? Or what
Yeah,
kind
maybe,
of problems?
At an organizational level.
A lot of problems. So
At an organizational level where you've...
Organizational problems. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's good. That's here. And culture. All right.
Yeah, well, not specific to what Samudra asked, but like, where do you see the biggest pushback for a DEO, and where do you see that role moving into like 5 years down the line?
Yep. DEO backlash. Plus 5 years. All right.
I'm personally really bad at graphic design and visual design, like pathetic. But I want to know how important that is when you look at experience design or in the roles that you have been through. Like, if I don't have that skill set, can I still develop it, or can I still get into the same field?
Can you develop skills as a visual or graphic designer if you're an experienced designer?
Yeah, or how are they necessary?
Are they necessary? Okay. So let me see, where would I put that? I think I'm going to put that, I think I'm going to make a new one here. So skill sets. Can you develop design skills over time? Is visual design important? In XD. Anything else? Okay.
I think this is going along with design thinking in companies, but I'm really curious about how you see people working within companies across a range of different, I guess, roles using design. So as a core designer, someone who grew up artistic and creative working in design, what's the difference between how you would use design and then maybe how you see people working in finance or strategy starting to incorporate design, like we talked about in engineering, because it's become more important to companies?
Yep. Okay, good question. All right. I'm going to say it's a lot of that stuff is happening right here. I'm going to say how design is incorporated inside companies in other parts of companies, like finance. I'll just do a mind map all day and not answer any questions. I kind of like this. Okay. All right. I think we have a lot to go on. So it's interesting because I think there's a lot of questions around, really about the impact of design inside companies. So I'm going to kind of start there and go from there. So so I wrote this book right here called Rise of the DEO in about 2011 when I was still working at Hot Studio. And the reason why I wrote the book was, well, first of all, I got invited to speak at a TEDx conference, and I was like, holy shit, what am I going to write? What am I going to speak about? I have nothing to contribute here. I'm just a designer. I'm just somebody who owns a design company. I don't do anything different. But a few people who heard me say that, they looked at me, these are clients, maybe some partners, people, contractors that worked with me, were like, Maria, you have no idea that you run your company so differently than other design companies, period. And I had no idea because I got a bachelor's in fine art at Cooper Union. I did not get a degree in business. I learned about business through instinct and maybe a little bit of reading and mentors. That's how I became a businesswoman. So I started really thinking about that. I'm like, well, how did I become so successful? And what is the lens to which I actually lead people? And I led 100 people. So it was a big company. And I realized that I treated every problem as if it was a design problem. I still do this to this day. That is my secret weapon, is whenever there's a problem, I do a bunch of things. First of all, every designer does this. You interview people, you ask people, and you get research, and you look for data, hard data, and you look like evidence, and you look for qualitative behavioral data. And then you look at sort of the risk factors. Another little secret trick that I have done with my design superpower is I would always ask the question whenever I had to make a decision, what is the worst thing that can happen? And if I can live with the very worst thing that can happen, then I'm going to take that risk. So that's how I.
So a lot of my friends and people say that they can't get clients to pay for user testing. They can't get the client to pay for that.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I hear that all the time. And like every designer, you got to be scrappy. You're either going to get people who don't believe in user testing. Sometimes you just don't tell them you're doing it. You just factor it into your fees, which is what I used to do when I was leading a company. I would say, this is how long it's going to take. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do during that time specifically, but this is how long it's going to take, and they will pay for user testing. So you could always figure out how to make user testing work. You could always be a guerrilla and be a student of the world. When people couldn't afford, I had a lot of nonprofit clients who couldn't really afford our fees. I would be like, where are the people that we need to watch? Let's go there and hang out. So there's tons of ways you can be a student and understand people. So this first thing that I would do is really interview and understand what people need. And then I would come up with a strategy and I would execute against that vision. And so I did that over and over again when I made decisions. So when I wrote the book, I started doing some research around these characteristics, like being a risk taker, combining this, this lens of intuition and being analytical, being incredibly people-centered, using empathy, being a risk taker, being bold. Every designer has to be bold. Let's see, what are some other ones? Risk taker, being a systems thinker. So another thing about being a designer is you don't think about solving the problem, you think about solving the system. So all of these things are design superpowers. And then I started looking at these superpowers and looking at people who I admired who had these same superpowers. And this is where that idea of the DEO came in, where there are actually leaders who use these design superpowers to be great leaders. And so I wrote the book about the DEO, and I predicted that today's world, because our world is a lot more complicated than it was, you know, when I was growing up, that you have to be thinking about systems, that you have to take, so many systems are breaking, you have to be bold, and that this change of moving from the importance of technology to the importance of experience design was you're starting to see evidence about that. As a matter of fact, 2011, there was a CEO study that was done by IBM, by 150 CEOs, and they all cited creativity as being the most important competency for the future. Started seeing these trends that were happening. And then you have companies like Apple and Intuit, you have Airbnb, you have all of these companies that have designer founders at the core. Now Steve Jobs, he grew up to be an engineer, but he's really a designer. He studied calligraphy. And here's a good time for me to talk about design and design in companies. Design, we have to all change our mindset about design here. You all, some of you are learning to be engineers, some of you are becoming UX people. It's all design. When you're working on creating a product, when you're working on creating an experience, you are all participating in the act of design. That's what makes companies successful. What companies that are not successful is when you compartmentalize engineering and strategy and designers, oh, you're in the corner just doing wireframes and pumping out task flows. That is not successful. You will not succeed. You will not build a holistic product with that thinking. You may get something out of the gate. You may ship something. But that may not, you'll never aspire to greatness if you don't think about design as a continuous act, where designers and engineers and product managers are working together in collaboration to create design. And in that context, in that successful cocktail, designers become the facilitators. Designers become the leaders of the process. Now, in many company cultures, you will find teams that are either dominant in engineering or dominant in product management, and maybe some are dominant in design. It's not about it's not about who's on top, so to speak. It's about looking at this important trifecta between strategy, design, craft, and execution, and engineering, and looking at that as equal strengths to solve a problem. And the designer's role, A, is to keep the team innovative, thinking innovatively, being the end user, the customer's relentless ally, using data and intuition to inform empathy and experience models. And so that's where you get really strong design thinking and design approach. So let's move over to design thinking. So design thinking, I hate that term. Just gonna put it out there. I hate that term so much because there's no such thing as design thinking. It's just design. You can't do design if you don't think about design, and you can't think about design and not do the design. A big part of being a leader and a DEO is about what I call getting shit done. You have to actually, at some point, you have to ship something. If you're just thinking about it, you're not shipping. But design thinking has become a term that companies have really held on to because they needed something to describe what they needed. Companies now are saying, I want some of that. I want that creativity. We're not creative. Well, the reality is everybody is born creative. So the person over there who feels like I don't have the skills to be doing graphic design, the answer is you may never have that particular, you may never know how to use Helvetica properly. Except my advice to you is never center it, it's always flush left. Right? You could learn those skills. You can absolutely take classes, and you should, in design. And those people who are studying UX, you absolutely should take classes in engineering. You should be, when you think about your job as the next sort of creators, you have to have a baseline. You have to have what I call learning. Like I studied French in high school, like till 12th grade. So when I go to France, I can kind of get by. That's the level that you should have. Like, you should know very clearly what you want to do, what your passion, what your calling is. What are all the tangential things around? And you should have an understanding of what those things are because you will become better collaborators. So the design thinking thing is really taking hold in companies. Autodesk has a design thinking program. IBM has just published papers about design thinking. Companies that were born with design leaders already do that process. Design thinking is really human-centered design methods. That's what they really are. There's no magic to them. If you look it up in Google, and you look up human-centered design methods, you will find a maelstrom of methods that you could use that really encourage brainstorming, ideation, and creativity. And everybody should know how to do those because they enable people to learn how to be creative. So it's the buzzword in companies right now, but what it's doing is it's okay for it to be the buzzword, but ultimately it's really about changing people's behavior. So it's no longer called that, it just is. And when it becomes a habit that people will do as part of their brainstorming process, then it won't die in the vine. If it's still kind of design thinking is the next best thing, then it becomes a fad. But if you could learn these human-centered design methods, which is like mind mapping, or it's about prioritization, or it's about understanding the good, bad, and ugly of a problem. It's about clustering and affinity diagram. All those things are. How many of you have done human-centered design methods here? Good. So you all know. Those are the ways that you will negotiate and work with your teams. And the good thing about those methods is that they're so low tech that people don't feel threatened by them. And I use them when I ran Hot Studio all the time. That's how we worked with our clients. We would bring out the Post-it notes and we would sketch on the board because everybody's born creative and everybody can write. So you use tools that don't intimidate people. It's going to open up their creativity in ways that that surprise themselves. This design thinking approach actually gets filtered into, if companies really are adopting it, it gets built into every part of an organization. So somebody mentioned finance. Well, it's funny because I'm leading design at Autodesk now, and I'm working on coming up with a single sign-on experience that touches all 150 products at the same time. And part of that is like going. It's about it's like that kind of project hits everything else. It hits like marketing and it hits experience design, but it also hits legal and finance. And so I started working on them. The finance team starts running into my office, like, "What are you doing?" The legal team, "What are you doing?" And I basically said, "Your terms and conditions suck. Our privacy statement sucks." It's painful. Why, I understand we need privacy. And we understand that people have to agree to terms and conditions. Let's face it, nobody reads them. Let's create something that's more human-centered. And now, yay, let's do a design thinking activity to figure it out. So when design thinking becomes part of the behavior, everybody in the organization is gonna participate, because it's not about doing design. It's the act of innovation and design and creativity that everybody could participate in. For those people who asked those questions, did I answer all of them? Yes.
Just so that the piece where you were talking about how finance may not in particular asking all this going on, in an organization like Autodesk, where design may be more integrated, or leaders are more thoughtful, like you said, companies that are started by designers.
Yeah.
For example, how does the company culture help integrate design so that someone in a field or role you might think would be unrelated, project management or something unrelated to what you're doing, for instance, actually uses, like you said, design in a way that they don't use design being as a term?
Yeah.
Part of what they do. How does that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that Autodesk is a progressive, cool company. Autodesk is rooted in engineering culture. Autodesk has been around for 33 years.
My roommate's a marketing student who worked with them this summer, so I kind of got that.
Yeah. So I'm the first senior leader Autodesk has ever had in their history. So it's a perfect example of a company that, like many companies like that, have not put, even though it's ironic that we create creative tools for creative people, from engineering to designers, they still made decisions as if it was all about the technology, which is why our products are good, but they're not great. My job is to make the products great. My mission is to make products that it's not that just people like and they get through it because it's hard and complex, to creating product experiences that people love so they can unlock their creativity. But Autodesk was very, very resistant, like many companies, thinking that design was gratuitous, that they were defining design as this little thing that a small group of people did. But what they saw was they were starting to fall behind. They were starting to see, like many companies, like IBM, for example, were starting to see that their products were becoming dinosaurs, that people were no longer forgiving bad experiences. And that's why design is now really hitting the mainstream in ways in companies where there's an opportunity for leadership, less resistance. But there are companies that don't get the memo. And there are people who work in those companies. And they're like, you know what, Maria, this is really, really great. I'm really inspired by what you're saying about standing up and being a leader, but I just don't have the support. And what I say is, first I say life is short. Don't stay in a job that you don't love, because you will always find another job. So it's very important to look at your leaders, all right, and ask yourself, are those the people that you want to work with? So that's the first thing. But there's another one. You have to see, are there cracks in the culture? Can I make an impact? If I step up, can I make an impact? And I would say, in my experience, where I didn't grow up in an environment where they embraced design all the time, I'm one of those people, and this is getting to a lot of the culture issues, questions that you're raising. I'm one of those people who's like, in order to make any kind of massive change, you have to start with the culture. You can't talk about quality. You can't talk about user research and justifying that. You have to look at where the culture is. And then, so when I joined Autodesk almost a year ago, I took 3 months and I said, I'm going to interview everybody in the company. Now, there's 9,000 people in the company. I didn't interview all 9,000, but I made a pretty damn good dent, traveling around the world, hanging out with people, sitting with them in their offices and seeing how they worked and listening. Right? And then while I was doing that, my little secret society in my head's like, where are all the cool people at? Thank you. Who are all the people that are going to be culture changers? They exist in all parts of the organization. They're in the interns. There's, the first layer. They're in middle managers. There's the executive leader. I started looking for all of those people who kind of like believe what I believe. And then what you do is you unionize. You build a movement from the people that you know could attach on to this idea. And then they find people that are like them, and they start advocating. And that's how you change culture, is you change culture from kind of the bottom up. Now, there is a chance that there's somebody at the top who's going to put the kibosh on stuff, and that's where you have to really think about and ask, is this a company where I can have impact or not? And you have to ask those hard questions. And I do say, don't stay in a job where you don't believe in your leadership. Don't stay in a job where you don't believe in the CEO. It's so important to believe in the CEO. I love that man. And that's one of the reasons why I joined Autodesk. I didn't really talk about Autodesk. I kind of glossed over it because I didn't want to spend an hour on my story. But I was the CEO of Hot Studio, and I sold my company to Facebook. And there were about 50 of us that went and we essentially doubled the amount of designers at the time that were at Facebook. And I learned so much at Facebook. I was, this independent CEO, scrappy, never worked in a big corporation. And then suddenly, boom, right inside a giant corporation of 6,000 people. And I was essentially a middle manager put in a box, which I did not like. But I learned a ton about how to ship products. And I believed deeply in Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. And it's an awesome place to work. But while I was working at Facebook, a recruiter called me. And I was like, nope, not going to leave Facebook, and for a number of reasons. And I said, but tell me who the company is you're trying to find a leader for, and I'll make some recommendations. So the recruiter said, oh, it's Autodesk. I went, oh, I love Autodesk. Autodesk is the coolest company that nobody has heard of unless you're an engineer or a contractor or an architect. It's a fucking cool company. And I love Carl Bass. I love that man. I interviewed him for my book. He's in my book. Before I started working at Autodesk, I had met Carl, and I instantly related to him. This is a guy, he lives around here. You might bump into him at Rick and Ann's, or Cole Coffee, if that's what's still called now. He's got a couple of places. Cactus Taqueria on Sunday when it's bacon BLT quesadilla day. He's always there for lunch. So if you ever want to run into Carl Bass, that's where he is. And I love this guy because he's so authentic. He's so authentic for a CEO. This is a man who's the leader of a $2 billion company. And what I love about him is he is who he is. He's a normal person. Any of you could run up to him and talk to him, and he will respect you and look you in the eye and answer you. And that's why I was drawn to Autodesk, because I believed in the leadership. I also believed in the mission. I believed what they told me, which is, Maria, we need to radically change the way we design products. And I said, are you ready for me? Because I'm not going to join your company if you're not really ready for change. And so, and somebody talked about, this kind of stuff about being your authentic you. When I went to art school, and I looked like, a bridge and tunnel girl with the giant hair, and loud, obnoxious, crazy accent, I did not look like the kinds of designers that they hire in New York City. And this is the 80s, like I said. A guy named Massimo Vignelli was ruling the roost, Pentagram, Pinwheel. There's all of these studios, and they were hiring young white boys. And I was an obnoxious girl from Staten Island. I did not think I was going to get a job. And I met another unicorn, Richard Werman, who didn't look like anybody, and I started working for him. And I think he gave me the confidence that it's not about how you look and how you act. It's really the sort of, it's the authenticity that you bring. It's the work that you do. It's about integrity. And so that really gave me the confidence that I could be different. And then when I was running Hot Studio, I was the only female CEO. I was constantly pitching against guys. But I used it as a differentiator, because everything about design is always about how are you different than other people. That, you know, if you're designing something similar than somebody else, then you're not doing your job, because what's the point of doing it? Because somebody else has done it already. Your job is to say what is uniquely different and how is that valuable. So I was like, I'll just tell you, even though everybody in the world is listening to me online. So I was like, hey, you know, I'm a hot girl. I'll use my hotness to get jobs. So I would like go and pitch, and I would dress very, not provocatively. I'm not, you know, this is not really that worth it as a provocateur. I'm a protagonist, but not a provocateur. But I would own my femininity. I would own it. And I always said, I'm going to be honest. And I'm okay that I don't have a veneer. I'm not that kind of leader that is, you know, suave. I'm like, I say things sometimes. I say things without sometimes I say things without thinking. And I know my superpowers, and I definitely know my kryptonite. And I own up to that, because we all have them. You all have something that you are really awesome at, and you need to like rock that. You also have to own up to the fact of things you're not good at, and make sure that you align with people who are good at the thing that you're not good at, because you can't be great at everything. And so, you know, I just slogged through, and I weathered the highs and weathered the lows, but I've always maintained who I was. And I feel like I have no skeletons behind me, because I've lived my life honestly and with integrity. So it's important to be authentic, because it becomes if you do it well, it becomes your differentiator in life. And, you know, protagonist, I would say, you know, as somebody who designs, I really believe, I root for people. Coming back to my story, my job is to be in service to others. My job is to make things better than where they were before. So I'm always going to be that person. Whoever works for me, they know it. It's like, you're going to have fun working for me, but I'm going to push the shit out of you, because it's really important that we're being bold. And so I think being a protagonist is about being a leader and being bold, and help and elevating others. I kind of talked about designing your calling, because it's really important, because, you know, you guys are a lot younger than me, but I'm over 50 years old. I'm halfway dead. If I'm lucky, I'm halfway. I'm more than 50%. I'm closer to death than I am to like birth, right? So, and we don't know in this world with terrorism, we don't know, we could die tomorrow. All of us could be dead tomorrow. So it's really important to live your life every day as if it's your last. You have to live your life and enjoy what you're doing. And that's why it's important to make sure that you follow your calling. Don't graduate here saying, I'm doing this because I need a job. You're always going to have a job. Guess what? We all have jobs. You graduate, you go from student to having a job. So be clear while you're here, what are the things that you're really passionate about, and make sure that you're doing that and not necessarily following things because you think you need to make money, because that's not going to make you happy. Let's see. I think I talked about skill sets, right? You're going to go take some art classes. Yeah. Remember Helvetica flush left? Okay. And don't use like H1, H2, like really be thoughtful about your typography. But take some classes, and you know what? Take some classes, but don't think that you can master it. So you might be able to, but you don't have to. Being a designer is being really well-rounded. It's about being really clear what you do great. What do you do great? What's the thing that you do really great? What is it? Economics? What did he say? Behavioral. Behavioral economics. I still don't know what that is. Do that really great. Look at the edges, and then find partners who do those things really great. But take those classes and be curious. But don't worry. You don't have to be great at graphic design in order to be a good experienced design person. Some places like Facebook, I see you got the little sticker. They're hiring people, they'll hire designers who are good at, they have to be good at visual, and they have to be good at interaction design. But there are other places like Autodesk, which is like, no, we want information architects who can think very, very deeply, and we also could use visual designers. So you don't have to be great at both of those. Just be clear about what you do great and go for that kind of job. Let's see. I talked about all that stuff. I think the role of design is incredibly important. Incredibly important. So, and it is it's a hard sell in companies. It is, I have to say, it's a hard sell in companies. At Autodesk, when I was getting recruited, I was like, just want to let you know, we're the researchers, because we're going to have researchers. And they have researchers at Autodesk. They're all, you have people who are looking at the future 10 years out. They're research scientists. And then you have some people who are validating stuff on Scrum teams. And there are some people who are called researchers, and then there are some people who do research. My advice is, like design, research is kind of a verb too. You can teach research techniques, but it's important to validate your assumptions using qualitative and quantitative information. So if you are working for a company and they don't value research, you do the research. Just don't call it research, call it something else. I always used to do that. Like, oh, they don't like that, just call it something else and just do it anyway. Okay. Diversity inclusiveness, I really talked about this, where design is really a verb, is that the key through inclusiveness in design process is to make sure that those teams, engineering, product management, and design, are working in collaboration on day one as one unified group, strategic force. Nobody owns the strategy. Nobody owns, then there's specialists, like the product manager may be looking at market intelligence and looking at data in a different way than an engineer is looking at data. But at the end of the day, you all can come together and participate in the design process if you start at the same time. So that's really, really important. If you put engineering at the end or you put design in the end, you are missing so much mind share. You're only getting a third of the thinking. So it's really important to bring people into the design process and bring a lot of people in. So when I'm doing a lot of cultural change at Autodesk, the one way I do it is I go wide. I want to hear from everybody. Because once you start hearing from everybody, you're going to start seeing patterns. Say you talk to 100 people. You'll probably say you talk to 100 people, there might be 10 discrete ideas that come out of that the 100 people say. So as a designer, your job is to listen for the patterns, bring them down. It's a small subset of patterns that then becomes something you can act on. So you go wide, you include everybody, and then you come up with your framework that's based on inclusiveness, and then you have a smaller team executing against that vision. The good news is the people who feel that they've been heard will buy into your idea because they've participated in the process. So it's another secret weapon I used to use at Hot Studio. Okay, what didn't I cover? People. I got 15 minutes. What didn't I cover on the board, or are there new questions? Yes?
So you talked about hard skills and like visual design.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
How do designers grow as leaders in, running business contexts?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how do you design as leaders? First of all, you should buy my book because it gives you the whole roadmap on how to become a leader in that book. There's hard skills and soft skills. Like I said, I never got a degree in business, but I used everything like a design problem. So there's activities you can do. One thing is, I would start is look at you and say, what are your superpowers? What do you inherently have? If you were given a title leader tomorrow, what would you say are your strongest skills as a leader? Your what? I want an answer.
I've actually questioned this.
That's okay. It doesn't matter.
I lead a design team right now.
Okay.
No one told me how to get to where I'm at.
Yeah.
So I think this is something important to share with people who are trying to get a design job. Like, yes, you want those hard skills of UX and visual design, but no one really tells you how do I lead a design team?
Right.
How do I
Yeah.
organize all these different departments together through
Yeah.
design?
But what is your power? What makes you a great leader? I know you lead teams, but what makes you a great leader? A good listener is part of it, right? So being a good listener. Anybody else? Like, if you were a leader tomorrow, what would you say is your strongest superpower?
Spotting opportunities.
Spotting opportunities. Okay. What would you say is your greatest superpower?
Synthesizing different opinions.
Okay. Synthesizing different opinions. What would you say is your biggest weakness? If you were a leader, what would you say you'd be the least comfortable doing?
I think that's interesting because the thing that I feel is kind of my superpower
Is also your weakness?
kind of also on the flip side my weakness. I would say listening and empathizing could also sometimes slow me down, or just like
So listening may slow you down and you won't get anything done because you're listening too much.
Or like over empathizing.
Over empathizing. Yeah. So the reason why I'm asking is the very first thing you should do, because you're all leaders. I usually end my talk, my Rise of the DEO talk, by quoting Lady Gaga. You are all born superstars. Go and find your own stage. And I love that quote because you're all leaders. So the first thing you need to do is look at you and say, what am I great at? What would make me a great leader? Why would people be attracted to my leadership skills? And then make a list. What are the things I'm not really good at? Right? And because because one thing about being a leader is to make sure that you maximize the strengths, and if you're great at getting stuff done, maybe that's the kind of leader that you need to be. If you are a great listener, use listening to bring others aboard. So use those skills, and then there's things that, like I said, I feel like other than authenticity and integrity, it's those qualities that I talked about in my book. The 6 skills, which are being an agent of change. Being a good leader is always not accepting the status quo, but what can you do to make things better? What can you do things to make better on behalf of other people? Being socially intelligent. So you're talking about the hard skills. Those skills are so much undervalued, and in today's world, they are the most important thing that you can do. It's being empathetic and people-centered. And part of being empathetic and people-centered is, as a leader, is to be a mentor, not a manager. So when you are a leader, you think it's very top-down. I need to stand up. I need to be powerful. I need to tell people what to do. A great leader is a listener. A great leader is looking at the people that they're leading and figuring out how they could rise up and be leaders. So all of that is around being having The soft skills, they're much more important than the hard skills, because you'll get the hard skills through time and experience. And then another bit about being a leader is not always going with your gut and not always going with the numbers. You have to live in this world between intuition and analytics. And I often say it's the difference between the what and the why. Numbers will always tell you the what, and intuition may tell you the why, but you have to live in the what and the why. So living in that balance between numbers and analytics. Another thing about leader, you have to prove that you can get shit done. You can be the sweetest person on the planet, but if you can't demonstrate, if you can't articulate what impact you've made, what you've shipped, what you've contributed to, you will be ineffective as a leader. And then I mentioned the other ones, being a risk taker, not being risk adverse, because if you're risk adverse, you're never going to move the needle. So you have to figure out how far can I push something until it becomes too risky. And you'll be surprised if you ask that question. You can take a lot more risks than you probably do today. And then finally, the systems thinking. Being a leader is really realizing that you are sort of the person who's making decisions on behalf of the system. That if you press on something here is going to pop up. So if, like, you're a CEO, I have to think about talent pool, I have to think about design, but I also have to think about making money and being financed, and I have to also make sure that I don't get sued, and I have to make sure that that I have like a pipeline of work. I have to think about what the future holds. So I'm not going to be a dinosaur if I don't see it. So a leader has to be thinking broadly and has to be thinking about all the things that have an impact on their system. So those are the 6 characteristics that I talk about in my book in depth, and then just start. But realize you're all born leaders. You're all born leaders. If you've babysat somebody, you are a leader. Okay, 5 minutes left. Yes.
So to go back to this question about design for a year,
yes.
I think he actually asked it better below. The impact on companies for the design. So here you are at Autodesk, upgrading your tools, which were for engineers primarily, to hopefully over time make it so that to quote you, they can create beautiful design services to others.
Yes.
And then you have a company like Adobe.
Yes.
Which has been ostensibly creating these kinds of tools since day one.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Adobe's 2D and Autodesk is 3D. That's a big differentiation, right? Because you're going to have completely different applications. But Autodesk actually, they create tools for so many people. They have architects that, there's AutoCAD, which is an architecture tool which lets people imagine a world. Then you have very deep manufacturing tools, both additive and subtractive, a completely different subset. And then you have Tinkercad, and you have Sketchbook, and you have 123 Catch, which are more about creativity tools. So you have the range of people, and there's a range of different types of users. But the world between design and building is converging. So that's the other thing that's happening. I was telling you I was part of a couple of revolutions. The first was desktop computers. That was my first thing, analog to digital. My second thing was the internet revolution. Now 3D and manufacturing is the third revolution, where designing and building are combining. And so this long process from planning to actually building on a construction site is shortening. So the way we think about products and the way we think about design is changing. Now, when I started working at Autodesk, they're like, Maria, these are really complicated products. They are inherently complicated because the information is really complicated. I think it's really easy to hide behind complexity, because we are all human beings. We all have the same amount of cognitive load in our brains. And there's only so much that the human can concentrate on at any given time. And the more that we know about people, the more our intelligence, machine learning and data science and all of that stuff, the more we learn about people, the better we can predict what they need next, which will inherently make the tools easier to use, because right now we don't know what you want. So instead of giving you one meal, we give you 10 meals all at the same time, and you live in a world of complexity. So the fact that our tools cover everything from engineers to artists doesn't scare me, because what they have in common is humanity and having a brain and being human. So, one more question.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to get back at the question that was asked earlier about branding, especially for somebody who's starting off in the industry as a designer
Yes.
or a design researcher.
Yes. What the importance of branding?
Importance of branding, how do you go about it?
Yeah, I think branding is like design thinking. It's a term that people really misunderstand, and I kind of hate it too, because people think, oh, I got to do this experience thing, and then I got to add branding on top. And
I guess I was talking about like how you brand yourself.
oh, myself. Okay, I was going on a branding rant. How do I brand myself? Okay. Well, brand is one of those things where you can't assign to yourself. Branding are the things that people say about you when you're not in the room. That is true with your products, and that's true with your person, being a person. So the way you brand yourself is going back to being your true self, your true authentic self, and having the confidence for that to come forward. And then making sure that that you're a good human being, and that you have a track record of helping improve people's lives. And not being afraid of the lows when they come, because they totally come. So their highs are going to be there, and the lows are going to come, and they're going to suck. And I've lived through many different downturns when when I would go to work and worry if I can pay somebody. And you just have to, when you hit those lows, you have to not give up. You just have to fight. And you'll bounce back, and that makes you stronger. And then soon you can grow up to be a badass like me. So I'm going to end right there.